On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about a wide range of controversial issues with a guest who's learned his life lessons the hard way. Tamil Canadian business executive, philanthropist, author, community leader, and proud Canadian patriot, Roy Ratnavel. In his new book, Prisoner 1056, How I Survived War and Found Peace, Roy writes about his 1980s-era childhood in war-torn Sri Lanka, which was then in the midst of a long and bloody civil war that pitted the country's Sinhalese majority against an insurgency led by the Tamil Tigers, which many countries classified as a terrorist group. Roy himself was one of the many Tamil youth who were rounded up and imprisoned during this period, and he spent more than 2 months being brutalized in a government-run prison. Tragically, Roy's father would soon fall victim to government forces, though not before he found a way to get Roy out of prison and out of the country. This is how Roy, then still just a teenager, suddenly found himself living in Toronto in the late 1980s, working unskilled jobs while trying to learn English and understand the customs of Canadian society. Fortunately, Roy proved to be a quick study, rising up from a mailroom job in a then-fledgling Bay Street financial firm to become a star of the sales force. In time, Roy would rise to become vice chairman of CI Global Asset Management, which was to become one of Canada's largest investment management companies. For 2 decades, Roy crisscrossed Canada, giving sales presentations to farmers and cattle ranchers in small-town conference halls, where he often found himself the only non-white person in the room. It all sounds like the improbable premise to some kind of fish-out-of-water Apple TV comedy series. Yet Roy flourished in these lily-white environments, and he reports that during his entire professional career, he never once felt targeted by any kind of serious racism. Roy recently retired from CI, and now dedicates himself to philanthropy, community leadership, and travel. He also has written opinion pieces for Canadian publications, which is how I originally got to know him. Now, from what I've just described, you might think that Roy's story is a simple rags-to-riches immigrant tale. But Roy's take on his adopted Canadian home is more complicated than that. On one hand, Roy is profoundly grateful to Canada for taking in hundreds of thousands of Tamils fleeing the ravages of Sri Lanka's civil war. On the other hand, he's also become unsettled by Canada's economic and ideological direction. In particular, he worries that many immigrants who followed his path remain mired in ethnic enclaves and aren't being encouraged to integrate into the wider Canadian society. This includes some members of Roy's own Tamil Canadian diaspora. Despite the extraordinary economic gains made by Tamil Canadians in recent years, he worries, many still remain fixated on the geopolitics of their birth country. Even more than a decade and a half following the defeat of the Tamil Tigers and the end of Sri Lanka's civil war. More generally, Roy's become concerned by the political parochialism he observes among fellow Canadians. Some conservatives, he notes, seem to be channeling a rising spirit of anti-immigrant nativism, with South Asians, who've recently been implicated in a series of high-profile criminal and immigration scandals, often being singled out online for special abuse. Meanwhile, on the other side of the political spectrum, Roy reports, many Canadian progressives would prefer to complain about Donald Trump rather than imagine new ways to improve their own country. Please enjoy my interview with Roy Ratnavel, accidental Sri Lankan by birth, proud Tamil by heritage, and patriotic Canadian by choice. Roy Ratnavel, thanks so much for joining the Quillette podcast.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
We just had lunch a little while ago, and you told me this interesting story. You were talking about a conservative friend you had and how, like, on social media, guys always posting these sort of, like, I guess maybe meant to be funny, but sort of these memes about, shall we say, new arrivals in Canada committing crimes, and kind of this constant message about immigrants committing crime in Canada. A lot of news stories about immigrants who have been let out on bail under kind of very lenient circumstances. And this stuff has become clickbait in conservative spaces. Do you find it a little difficult now compared to, say, 5 years ago to navigate centrist or conservative political spaces now that this is such a common theme? Because I know, as I said in the intro, I wouldn't call you a doctrinaire conservative, but you lean to the right on a lot of issues. But now that right side of the political spectrum, you're just seeing a lot of anti-immigrant themes. Is this kind of a disorienting time politically?
Yeah, look, you've known me for over a decade now, and I'm the last person to scream victimhood of any kind. But I'm quietly observing this sort of a nasty trend towards immigrants, especially of brown skin, as of late. This friend of mine, I've known him for years, and it just, we exchange funny stuff, and I got a good sense of humor about things. But more and more, I'm seeing it's very mean, degrading.
I speak on campuses sometimes, and I actually find South Asian communities in Canada, students, young people, actually one of the most politically diverse communities in university. There's a lot of right-wing South Asian kids in Canada.
For sure.
This is a more common idiom in US politics. It's like, oh, so and so is going to win the Asian vote in New York City, or so and so is going to win the Asian vote in California, or Latinos are trending toward Trump. Is there any coherent political pattern, voting pattern you've observed among Tamil community in particular and South Asians more generally in Canada?
My basic argument always has been that immigrant communities are generally conservative. They're definitely socially conservative, and they run small businesses. They want low taxes. So everything the Conservative Party was proposing is really should be resonating to that group of people. But yet, often you find them, they run their household very conservatively, but they vote liberally. And I think that comes from the fear of the fact that what they read and hear, and I think the media does a pretty good job of also painting the Conservative Party as anti-immigrant party, which isn't true, but that's how it's perceived.
Your personal story is hard to compress into a few minutes, but I'm going to ask you to do it because you're on a podcast and
Right.
that's what people do.
Very quickly, there was a civil war in Sri Lanka, which intensified around mid 80s. So in 1987, I was at the age of 17, rounded up by the government troops and sent to prison. And miraculously, I was able to escape the prison with the help of my father's friend after 2.5 months of being tortured numerously and repeatedly. So when I came out of the prison, my father realized that maybe there's no longer opportunity for a Tamil young boy like me and thought Canada might be that land of opportunity, and how right he was. So he wrote a compassionate letter to the Canadian High Commission in Colombo, Sri Lanka. During that time, Brian Mulroney was the prime minister. He had a compassionate based visa program, and I was granted a visa when I was about 18 years old, just past 18. And I came here in 1988, and that's how I ended up in Canada. And it has been an amazing ride ever since. This country has given me everything I have today, including peace of mind and safety. So always have said, and it's one of my, I should probably trademark this, but I said that I'm an accidental Sri Lankan by birth, unapologetic Tamil by heritage, and a proud Canadian by choice. And so I'm every bit of Canadian as anyone who's been here 5 generations ago. And this is a country I want to give back to as long as I can give back, whether it's my time, my expertise, or some money to causes that I think that broadly supports the Canadians at large, coast to coast.
I don't want to turn this into an audio version of your LinkedIn page, but as I mentioned in the introduction, it's almost like a movie where you literally started in the mailroom.
You're right. I came here and I was able to get a job in the mailroom at a very small asset management company in On Bay Street, which is the Wall Street of Canada. And I guess because it was very small, that the CEO knew me, all the top brass knew who I was, and they knew my story. I just, as a rule, I just outworked everyone and everything. I went after every opportunity. Luckily, the head of the sales team at the time, he was 10 years well, he's still 10 years older than me, but he was in his late 20s. I was in my late teens. And he took me under his wing and he showed me how to behave in a corporate environment. What do I need to do to excel? So those things really did help me. I had no skill at the time. So if the immigration policy was based on skilled labor, I would have never made it to Canada. So I came on a compassionate visa program. But as far as the immigration policies and where Canada can improve, I mean, Canada did have one of the most enviable immigration programs in the world and on a point system. And I think we should still offer some level of compassionate visa to those who are running away from conflicts. And at the same time, I think when people come here, and I often say this publicly every time I speak to groups, new immigrant groups, I always say that remember, you have a responsibility too when you come here. And I think that maybe as a policy, Canada should demand that. In fact, integration should be one of the top priorities. Often I find, especially now, the immigrant groups tend to live in small pockets and they hardly integrate or engage with people who look different than them or have different culture than them. So maybe perhaps it should be something like, well, if you come to Toronto, Canada, sorry, maybe you need to go live in Saskatchewan, where there will be forced to integrate into the mainstream. Here in Toronto, certainly, especially speaking of Tamil community, if you go to Scarborough, you have every bit of service that you need to survive without even speaking a word of English. So,
So, like in a weird way, you suggested to me that the fact that at the time you came, it's now there's a large and flourishing Tamil diaspora, but at the time you came, I think you had no choice but to just throw yourself into multicultural
right, I
mix.
couldn't go to a Tamil banker, right,
Yeah.
or Tamil barber or anything Tamil. So, yeah, sure, the community has been very successful in one generation. That's 30 years plus. But it also now comes with this is just not unique to us alone. Is that if I were to come here now to Canada, I don't think I would have. I mean, I'm intellectually curious, so I'm always willing to talk to other people. But let's just say if I didn't do that, I would be probably less likely to succeed. I mean, in fact, one of the things I do in my retirement is trying to help these young kids from my community more skills like soft skills about how to engage other people in the other communities, and also just little things like the boardroom settings and all these things are it's hard to learn when you're just hanging out with your own people. And I was fortunate to have had that earlier on, and also I was fortunate enough that I lived in Vancouver for 20 years and traveled across Western Canada. And name me a small town in Western Canada, I can tell you I would have been there. And so it really gave me a bird's eye view to the country, and I've traveled extensively to the East Coast. So that really gave me that experience. So I think if I were to give one policy advice is we really need to figure out a way how to get immigrants who come here, how do we get them to integrate without forcing them? Like I don't think you want to force that, but we have to have some kind of mechanism in place where that can't happen.
You told me this interesting story. You reminded me of it recently, where when you came here, you were still in your late teens. You had like a working class job in it was I don't know, it's like a box factory or like a really sort of a low skill environment. And there was a guy, he was Italian. He'd come from Italy. You said you could barely understand him because he didn't speak any English or barely spoke English. And the reason it turned out was there was even at that time there was a large Italian community where those were his people, and he didn't really have to integrate. I'm sure you forget his name, and who knows where he is now. It'd be interesting to find out where he ended up because in a way, the fact that he had this community, I'm sure it was great, like emotionally, but it didn't really help him integrate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are scared of the unknown, and so if you give them an opportunity where they don't have to get uncomfortable, like I'll give you one example. When I came, I would sit at a dinner table, and I'll look, oh man, which fork would I use now? So I'll just wait for people to do something. I'll just copy them. And that's how I learned. And I think if you're not in those social situations, you'll never learn. And in this particular scenario, yeah, I mean, he was in his mid 50s, and I asked him how long he's been in Canada. He said 30 years, and he couldn't speak English properly. And I was wondering, how could that be possible? And so now I know how that could be possible because I see that sometimes in other immigrant groups.
50 or 60 years ago, there was almost no Tamils in Canada, like close to zero. And then all of a sudden, just because of this horrible war that happened in Sri Lanka, there were like several hundred thousand in a pretty short period. At the time when you came over, this war was still raging and it would rage for several more decades. And that kind of defined the politics of the Tamil community because
Right.
they were fundraising for, the Tamil Tigers, which call it a terrorist group, an insurgency. That itself is a controversial subject. And
Hmm.
in fact, it was an article in my newspaper at the time, the National Post, that you wrote a letter, and that's how we became friends. Then the war ended. The Tamil Tigers were defeated,
Hmm.
and the Tamil community entered kind of a different phase. Although it sounds like some members of the Tamil community refuse to go into a different phase. They still have a militant posture. In a sense, has there been two distinct phases of the Tamil diaspora existence in Canada?
For sure. Post war and pre war, I would say. And as you rightly pointed out, it ended May of 2009. So now we're looking at 16 plus years since the war ended. It took about a few years to, people are still, some haven't healed from the war. Maybe there's views about maybe because we were brown, nobody cares about us. There's a lot of victimhood, other blaming and stuff. But generally speaking, the pre war time the Tamil brand was well tarnished by the politics, the flags and the tigers and whether it's right or wrong, the people were anchored in that politics for a long time, and understandably so. They left a lot of people behind. And they could have had a brother, a sister. So emotionally, as I mentioned in my book, we were living in two worlds, right? One where I would say peace and prosperity and profit, and the other is grief and sadness and fear. So the war ended, and I think that the community just got started moving forward, and I would say the last decade or plus is the most productive and also most inspiring change that took place within the community. Now I look back, say a generation is defined as somewhere like 20 to 30 years. Tamils came here in the mid 90s. So you're looking about that time frame. And now I look at, we have successful entrepreneurs, doctors, engineers, lawyers, builders. I even see, hedge fund managers on Bay Street now who are running billions of dollars, money managers working for massive insurance companies and asset management companies. They're all Tamils second generation. So it has been a transformational change. But the politics, still, every time the time for federal election, you'll see the politicians pandering, speaking about the Sri Lankan politics and talking about how they're going to take Sri Lanka to Geneva and punish them and all. Nothing's going to happen, but they do throw that raw meat at the crowd and they eat it up. Such a retail politics, as you know. So the last go around, I and a few people thought we're just going to change the narrative here. I think we need to hold these politicians to policies, not the back home politics and policies here because, and I have said it repeatedly, and people don't like to hear this. My people, some people don't like to hear it. I say, listen, our kids are here. We are here. We should be worried about what is here that we need to fix. Standard of living is going down. Productivity growth is going down. Opportunity for young people are in there anymore like it used to be. So let's talk about what these politicians are going to do about the situation here in Canada, not the country we left behind. Sure, we can always uh, work that into as part of our ask, but the real first ask should be about the country that we uh, adopted to. And so we decided to do $1,000 plate dinner at a fancy hotel and put the party leaders of all the major parties and have someone like me or anyone like me who can ask questions outside of the politics of Sri Lanka, but really the politics of Canada. And I think that need to change in our community and it needs to change in every immigrant community. I think I shared this story with you during the 2010 Winter Olympics. I was in Vancouver at the time and I saw the Russia-Canada game, the hockey game, and I couldn't have been um, prouder to see the stadium full of red and the flag and their Sikh Canadians, Indo Canadians, or Sri Lankan Canadians, whatever you want to call them. All the hyphenated Canadians were there. They were all cheering for one team, and that was very heartwarming to see. And I would like to see that Canada again. I think we have been put into buckets. This is Indian Canadian, this is Chinese Canadian. So I'm actually dead set on trying to get our community to really focus on the issues at hand here, right here in Canada, more than politics in Sri Lanka.
You were involved on the sales side for investment products. This must have been in your 30s and 40s. You travel a crazy amount. You go all around Canada and give these sales presentations and whatnot. And I remember you told me the story, like you'd be in the middle of Saskatchewan and you'd give presentations to like hundreds of farmers. Um, like, I mean, often these were very prosperous people because, they were successful farmers. They had money to invest. Otherwise they wouldn't be coming to see you. Right.
Right.
Um, and you'd be up on stage giving a presentation. And I think you mentioned like sometimes you were maybe the only non-white person in the room, but it sounds like you generally got treated with respect. You told me once, I was skeptical, that you felt like in all your years in Canada, you never ever been felt victimized by racism, which I felt like that that can't literally be true, right? I mean, you must have encountered some racism, right?
I mean, I call it the dumb racism, like where people could call me some name or whatever. But generally speaking, just in terms of professional life, people didn't really treat me badly. If they did, I didn't know. I felt that every place I went to, it could be a small town, Alberta, um, they're usually kind of taken aback a little bit because you don't often see someone who looks like me in that profession. And but once you go there, I remember I was in Drayton Valley, Alberta, which is a few hours away from Edmonton. And this wonderful man, he had a farm, successful. He's also a financial advisor. And the first time I went, I was wearing a suit and a tie. I was wearing my, expensive shoes. Flew into Edmonton, drove there, and he just looked at me like, "Holy crap, you're not from around here, are you?" I said, "No." How, how'd you figure? He goes, "Well, first of all, you're dressed like you're a city boy, and the second of all, clearly you're not from, you're probably not from Canada." So anyway, so we had a good chat, and as we were chatting, he goes, "Oh, Barb is having a baby," and I go, "Oh, I thought it was his daughter," and he goes, "No, no, no, my cow. You're gonna come and help me." And I said, "Okay." He asked me to elevate the tail as I was standing there, and he gets in there and pulled his little
Oh
calf
my
out and
God.
everything. And my point is, I had a wonderful time with him, and we became good friends. He's probably in his 80s now. And he was here recently in Toronto for something. He looked me up. We went out and had a bite to eat and shared a drink and talked about the old times. And that's kind of the experiences I had. I mean, I have a lot of good friends. Some of them are mentioned in the book, are all from small towns. And yeah, the occasional person say dumb things. Sometimes it's out of naive take on things. But yeah, I don't think that No one ever said, let's not do business with this brown guy. Let's put it that way.
Part of it sounds like you're just somebody who says yes to things, right? Like if somebody asked me to help pull a cow out of another cow, I'd be like, that's not going to happen. But I remember there was one story where somebody, one of your colleagues, younger, more junior, but involved in human resources, came to you and kind of like took you to task because you had hired a white person for something, and it was like, hey, how come you're not hiring more purple people and green people? And I get the sense you're very good at tamping down conflict, but I also got the sense that in this situation, maybe you had difficulty keeping your cool, because that's got to be a weird situation when, someone 20 years younger, as white as me, is lecturing you on DEI.
Yeah, during COVID, stuff like this got to a kind of giddy height.
Yeah.
And I'm super sensitive about the DEI stuff because I grew up in a country that did that in early 70s. The difference is it was to favor the majority, not the minority, because the minority Tamils were, at that time, before that program, 60% of the university entrances, engineering or medical faculty, were Tamils. So they thought it was an unfair advantage Tamils had. Stable families and value in education, they thought it was an unfair advantage. So they wanted to create these Tamils need to score much higher marks to enter these faculties, and the majority Sinhalese don't have to have that high of a mark.
That's kind of what the Ivy League did to Jews in the 30s and 40s, and I guess what Harvard did to Asians.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that's why I got super annoyed at that stuff. Yeah, I was summoned by this head of DEI person who was a middle-aged white lady, very nice, well-intended, called me. We never met before, and basically asked me that there was somebody hired in a junior sales position. I didn't hire. I'm sure one of my reports hired it. Probably this position about 6 levels down from where I was. And so I'm not going to get involved in hiring that person. But I said, okay, so what's the question? And she said, well, there were like half a dozen applicants, final round, and this young boy is a white kid. And I said, okay. And she goes, do you know why that is? I said, I'm sure he's probably the most qualified. She goes, well, we're trying to get diversity in our company. And I said, listen, have you seen my picture? Do you know how I look? She goes, well, no. I said, I'm a brown guy from Sri Lanka, and it's the height of diversity here in our company. And you should probably come and walk my sales floor and see how many non-white people and white people working along together, having a great time and producing. And I said, by the way, when I report to the board every quarter, they only ask me for two things. What was our sales? What's our earnings going to be? Well, what's our next quarter is going to be? Nobody asked me how many white kid I hired and how many brown kid I hired. So if you do me a favor, do not ever call me. And if you feel so much guilt about this thing, and maybe you as a white person should give up your job to some brown lady. And that hung up, and that was that.
Did she quit?
No, she didn't. It's all moral exhibitionism and performative. And so,
well, you say that, but she probably has a spreadsheet. I don't know. Maybe she gets bonused out according to how many round squares she has in her spreadsheet or something.
Maybe. And I think those are the kind of little things started to eat at me as a senior executive. And I was starting to see that slowly kind of seeping into the corporate culture, which we never had. I mean, if I ever found out I became the head of sales and the head of Canadian distribution because I was brown, I'll be really offended. I like to think that I was very good at what I did.
If you're in that line of work and you don't have people on your sales floor who have the language skills and cultural knowledge to manage high value East Asian clients, South Asian clients, Jewish clients, African clients, South American clients, you're going to go bankrupt. Like I'm guessing if somebody called from the East Asian community and wanted to talk to, say, a Mandarin speaker, I'm guessing the answer wasn't, sorry, we don't have anyone like that here. I'm guessing you had a diverse sales force.
Oh yeah, we did. I mean, especially in Vancouver. But as far as the hiring practices go, I mean, somebody can speak Mandarin, somebody can speak French and English fluently, Mandarin and English fluently. It's a massive asset. Let's just say if I had two people, one Asian guy and one white guy and they're equally good, but one has a language advantage, I'll hire that person. But they have to be both equally good in skills. My father was ahead of his time. And I always say he never left Sri Lanka, but he traveled the world through books and he was an avid reader. When I left for Canada, he gave me a few advices. One of them, he said, when you go to Canada, do everything you can to assimilate. And if you want to know what a local person does, go to a bar and hang out and watch them and grab a beer and talk to them. And you'll get to know people very quickly. Third thing he said is, son, unlike Sri Lanka, Canada is not based on caste system, it's economic system. Rich brown person doesn't hang out with a poor brown person. They'll be hanging with a rich white person. So that's the way this thing goes. So I never kind of looked at these things from the lens of skin or caste. Not Canada has caste system, but in where I came from, if you're a certain caste, you're going to hang out with a poor person from that caste, even if you're rich. I think he did me a massive favor to look at things differently. And people saw the same thing. I think when people saw me walk into a boardroom, do a presentation for a hedge fund or whatever, they looked at me and they said, "But this guy knows what he's talking about. I want to do business with him. He will make me money."
Since I've known you, you've always been like unusually well dressed. I have a short list of people who I would ask for fashion advice on things like watches. And, if I were buying a silk tie or something like that, you'd definitely be on that list.
Yeah, that's because my father was always well dressed, well groomed. He grew up during the British era, and I never seen him without a tie if he's going outside for work or something. Even in Tamil, there's a saying, and I'll loosely translated, half person, half clothes. And so my dad understood that a well dressed person will be respected better.
Does one of your formative professional development experiences as a young kid is you were like, I think, still working in the mailroom and you were looking for advice on ties from
Yeah,
executives?
it's all started with our conversation with this gentleman named Bill, who became my lifelong mentor, still is. He came in to the office to drop a mail in my little mailroom, and I just took a look at him. He was almost like he came out of a GQ magazine. And my father was dressed like that, although he didn't have that expensive ties because probably couldn't afford them. All he said was, "Hi, my name is Roy Ratnavel. That's a nice tie." And he goes, "Oh, really? Thank you so much." And so we had a conversation. And a few weeks later, I saw a bag sitting on my desk in my little mailroom. I opened it up, and there was some ties that he used before, no longer using them. Boss, Brioni, Amani, Canali, and things like that. And I always jokingly say, since then, I became the most well-dressed mailroom guy on Bay Street. Right.
Yeah.
And then I started doing that kind of to the other younger salespeople over the years. It's sort of like a symbolic gesture of paying it forward.
You told me this story. This is a while ago. This is actually when we were having dinner. That, like, you live in a very nice neighborhood. Sounds like a fairly white neighborhood. Some locals invited you to a dinner party, and they were talking about Trump. And I've been in this situation too, where you get 10 Canadians at a dinner table, and someone just starts talking about how much he hates Trump, and it's considered like a safe subject because it's just kind of assumed that everybody hates Trump, and
Right.
and not just Trump, but everything Trump stands for. So it's like, you're not supposed to talk about religion or politics at the dinner party, but it's almost like, well, it's not politics because, it's like talking about how we all hate the Yankees and we love the Blue Jays.
Right.
But it was some maybe assumed that because you're not a white guy that like you're going to be
Right.
leading the charge on how much you hate Trump and stuff like that. Is that an issue sometimes? Is that it's just kind of maybe people assume your politics just based on your life story and who you are?
Yeah, it's like people are sometimes shocked that I support conservative values, and they go, "Oh, I thought you were a liberal supporter because you're Tamil and you're brown." And so all these generalization. Yeah, I mean, I've had so many of these stories, John. It's got to a point where I don't even say anything anymore. I just kind of nod my head and drink the nice wine they're serving, and I walk away.
Okay.
Look, and I'm not, you know, cheering for the MAGA or I'm not anti-Trump. All I say is that look at the policy. Is the policy good or bad? And then judge the person from that. And I think I said something like, I don't know, America is trying to elect a president, not a priest, because everybody's talking
Mm.
about his flaws and, he's a womanizer. He said this. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I don't know why Canadians are so worked up about the politics of the South. We have our own issues to deal with.
And this is before
Um,
the tariffs thing hit Canada because
yeah, but
yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
like I had this tariff funny conversation with somebody I know, and I just came back from California because I wanted to spend some time with my son, and I really enjoyed it. I just thought the economy is booming. It's phenomenal what they're doing with AI and the amount of money in the valley and in Palo Alto and San Diego and San Francisco Bay Area. I ran into so many young Canadians who had just graduated from Waterloo. Waterloo, by the way, is a Canadian university, is well known for engineering faculty, and they just got graduated, and these guys are all moving down there. And it really breaks my heart to see that because that's where the opportunity is. So I get irritated when people are focusing on Trump, Trump, Trump. And I'm like, guys, like we got the lowest productivity growth in the entire G7. So I started piping up about that stuff and say, why are you guys not focusing on that? That immediately becomes in their mind that I'm defending Trump or I'm pro Trump. I mean, even I talked to somebody I know recently said, when I said I went to California, yeah, that's the story I was going to say, that I'm boycotting any travel to the US. I'll go anywhere except the US until Trump leaves the office. And I said, okay, so where did you go? And he told me Costa Rica or something. He flew Delta and he was telling me the story as he was drinking Starbucks. And he stayed at the Marriott. The point that I'm making is the hypocrisy drives me crazy. Many Canadians don't even know that Tim Hortons is owned by an American company. I find this whole thing is exhibitionism, and I'm a better person because I'm boycotting America. And we have to admit the fact we need America, and I think we should be professional about this and try to cut a deal with Trump. Japan is doing it. Every other country is doing it. And we just got our elbows up and head in the sand. And that's what drives me crazy. And nobody wants to talk about it. They just want to talk about Trump. And I don't know how that helps us to move forward.
But now your son, who followed in his father's and his grandfather's footsteps by being a great student and is studying at a prestigious university in the States, I'm wondering if you even talk about this issue with him. Does he even think of himself as a Tamil Canadian, or is he at a stage in life and maybe a stage in consciousness that it's not something he thinks about?
Even with him, I remember telling him the first year he was going to school, I said, Aaron, you should, because he's in M&A, global banking kind of field is where he wants to go. And I said, do you want to go to the US for that? Do you work in New York or you want to work in like LA or something? That's where this is going to happen. Originally, he was, no, he was fought me back. He's like, no, I want to come back to Canada. I'm a Canadian and all that stuff. But I think he got an internship in Texas, um, in Dallas recently, relating to a oil and gas M&A firm. And he saw the offer, which is 50% more than what he could make in Canada. Um, and he will pay 50% less in taxes. So all of a sudden you could see the wheels are starting to shift again and going, why would I even come back here? And so that's kind of the sad part of this. I mean, he feels Canadian for sure, but I think as a person, self-motivated, interested in himself, providing for his family one day, he thinks he's better off leaving Canada. And I don't think that's anecdotal by any means. So we truly, really have a structural issue here. And yeah, he's Canadian, but he wants to work in the US.
Roy, thanks so much for joining the Quillette podcast. For those who are interested in learning more about Roy's story, his recently released book is called Prisoner Number 1056, How I Survived War and Found Peace. It's a fascinating story about young life in Sri Lanka and a longer and very successful life in Canada. Roy, thanks so much for appearing. Wish you well.